It is just a huge honor today to be podcast interviewing Wendy Gesund. Did I say that right?
You did.
Gesund as in Gesundheit, right? And you were born in Detroit, Michigan. You moved down to Ahwatukee in 1999 to go to ASU. And you are I consider you a very strong pillar of the community. You've done so many things. Your career for decades has been in what would you call it? Substance abuse, counseling,
In counseling and in behavioral health.
Behavioral health, and that's that's a big issue. You know, one of the reasons we even started Tukeetown is like it seems like the national news just wants to keep you focused on North Korea and Russia and Ukraine and Putin, and I'm trying to get people to focus back on Ahwatukee. And living here 30 years, talking to patients chairside for 30 years, I think substance abuse is probably a major problem in what, 1 out of every 5 houses in Ahwatukee? Is that about what you would figure it out?
Probably, or 1 out of 10.
Well, that's a big difference. You think it's 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 5?
I'd say 1 out of 10.
1 out of 10? And how many houses in Ahwatukee, 1 out of 10 houses, are they affected by ISIS or the Ukraine or a North Korean missile? So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get the center of attention back here, and it seems like maybe 1 out of 10 houses has someone living there, but what percent of families has an uncle, a cousin, a dad, a son, a sister that's suffering from substance abuse or mental health issues?
Many,
yeah. It seems like every one of my close friends has a grandpa, grandma, uncle, cousin, sister, daughter, somebody. I mean, I have a very good friend who, after his son went through rehab for the 4th time, killed himself. I have another very good friend, Ahwatukee, after his son went through rehab 4 times, overdose. So it's a huge issue.
It is a huge issue.
And how long have you been in this arena?
I have been working in behavioral health for the last probably 30 years.
And you're probably talking to a bunch of kids from Desert Vista or Mountain Point that aren't even 30 years old. So you've been doing this longer. My 30-year anniversary at the dental office was yesterday, September 21st.
Congratulations. Yeah. That's awesome.
So we've been doing our profession longer than a lot of people are even alive. So what could you share? What have you learned in 30 years of doing behavioral health?
What I've learned in 30 years of doing behavioral health is that people need to find their happiness. They need to find a balance in their life and find things that are healthy for them to do, rather than getting into making the wrong choices and getting into the wrong things. And even if you have a mental health disorder, there are many ways that you can cope with your mental health disorder besides just taking medications and going through therapy. There's a lot of things that you can do on your own to create a better life.
Like?
By having a healthy lifestyle, by getting into exercise, getting out and hiking, getting out and enjoying activities with friends that are healthy, and doing things that are good for you.
It seems to me that if I break my arm, everybody feels sorry for me. If I get breast cancer, they have pink ribbons and have 5Ks, and everybody's sympathy for me. If I break a tooth, everybody says, go to the dentist and fix it. But if your brain breaks or has a health issue or something, it's almost like it's embarrassment. It's like, it's almost like a taboo. Like if I broke my arm, everybody will sign my cast. If I go to school and tell everybody I'm bipolar or schizophrenic or suffering from depression, everybody's kind of like, do you agree with that or not really?
I do. I think that people that have disorders feel that stigmatism, and people that are not suffering from that have a hard time understanding why is this person reacting the way that they're reacting. That seems they're responding to a question that would be normally answered one way, they're responding totally the opposite way. So I think there is a stigmatism, and it's harder for people to deal with that.
And it's across the spectrum. Like, I've flown in airplanes 100 times. Like a little 1-year-old starts screaming because the tears are popping. And within 5 rows of that baby, someone's going to lose it. And, you want to turn to this person like, well, how old were you when you were born? Elderly people. It just people, like you say, when you get in an airplane or you talk to people, you expect them to respond a certain way. And if they respond, screaming or autism spectrum or something like that, people are just, they're really thrown by it, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. In the news the other day, a young man with autism in Buckeye that ended up getting arrested because the officer thought that he was on drugs when he was really just self-stimulating and acting very normal, and the officer thought that he was possibly on drugs and handcuffed him and everything else. So I think it's really important for people to be able to understand and recognize when someone behaves differently, why they're behaving differently, and that it's not always drugs.
And there was one in the news the other day where the officer didn't realize he was deaf, and the guy wasn't responding to his command. And the people on the sidewalk were yelling, he's deaf, and the officer shot and killed him.
Oh my gosh.
And because you expect everybody to act a certain way.
Yes.
One of the biases that I've heard in Ahwatukee for 30 years is that all the drugs are in South Phoenix or out on the avenues and everything, that Ahwatukee is this really nice, clean, highly educated community, and that we don't have those problems. But then I talked to some of my patients who are police officers. They said, are you kidding me? Who's got more money to buy drugs? Kids at Desert Vista and Mountain Point, or some kids in a very poor district? So what would you say to some mother who said, well, all the drugs are in the avenues in South Phoenix and not here in Ahwatukee?
I would say, Howard, I agree with you. That's absolutely a myth. I think that drugs are
Or they say Apache
everywhere.
Junction. They say, oh, well, crack, that's Apache Junction. And it's like, it's an hour drive. How long does it take to drive to Apache Junction?
Yeah,
That's a half-hour drive. Those drugs are right here in Ahwatukee?
Drugs are everywhere at all economic levels. And yes, people that have more money to spend on drugs. So I think that it's an epidemic problem right now, especially among our youth, and especially heroin has become a really, really bad epidemic drug. Of people start out taking pain pills and then they progress into, let's just get heroin because it's easier.
Now, is that old school where they've got to get needles and shoot that, or did they find a cleaner way to take? I mean, are they smoking it, or are they eating
I
it?
think they can do it all those different ways.
Well, I think when it involved a needle, that would probably make most people not do that. I mean, most people, like in my office, half the people are afraid of shots. I just can't see half the people sticking a needle in them. So, do they find a way to use it without a needle?
I believe that they do, yes.
Yeah. So they get started on Vicodin, Percodan, opioids, OxyContin.
Yes.
And then the doctor doesn't give it to them anymore, so they switch to heroin.
Yes. It starts out as maybe somebody breaks their arm or somebody gets hurt, and then they get addicted and they just want more and more and more, or it's just a matter of kids, I think as young as junior high, are starting to.
I'm not saying it's fake news or anything. Obviously, the opioid crisis, it's a crisis. I mean, I think 50,000 Americans are going to overdose. But where I call suspect is they never put it in context. Like, I think the 3 most abused drugs are sugar, cigarettes, and alcohol. And Ahwatukee sells that at what, 25 different locations? I mean, if you go to, some of these corners, like 48th between Ray and Elliott, and then over to 51st Street, that corner, there's a Circle K on all 4 corners. I mean, you can get, so you can get, so when they say 50,000 will overdose and die this year on opioids, which is almost all the people that died in the Vietnam War or the Korean War, but how many of those would die from alcohol? I mean, Can you put it in perspective of the opioid?
I don't know. I don't know what the percentage is.
Or
and I
how many
think
do you think
people
will die
dying
from
from alcohol, it's more of a progressive,
Right.
disease, and as I think that people that have alcoholism shorten their lifespan. They have more health issues. They have lots more problems, and they die at a much younger age.
Yeah, well, that's where it's not fake news, but it's news not in context. Like when it just seemed like every newspaper article was opioid, 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 opioid. Being a dentist, the government sent all this stuff. Don't prescribe it if you don't have to. Like after a root canal or give them aspirin and Tylenol. And I get all that, and I think it's great. I would just think alcoholism has got to be far larger than the opioid crisis. I mean, you can buy alcohol on 25 different corners in Ahwatukee. You can't buy heroin on 25 different corners in Ahwatukee.
The difficulty is there's a lot more young people dying of heroin overdose these days. There's probably, when I teach my classes, there's probably one person each month that knows somebody. There's probably every single person in my classes will raise their hand and say that they know somebody that died of heroin overdose. My niece in Michigan right now is going to a funeral this weekend of one of her best friend's brother just died of a heroin overdose in Chicago. So I think that it's something that's definitely they're talking about it because it really has become really, really bad. And I think that the medical profession is getting a better hold on things. But in the past, people would doctor shop. They would go to the hospital and say, I need medication for this, and I hurt my arm. Or they'd call the dentist and say, I need a pain pill, and then they'd go to somebody else.
But all that's going to do is drive them from pharmaceutical-made narcotics, Vicodin, Percodan, OxyContin, to heroin, as you said earlier.
Well, I think it's going to hopefully it's going to help. It's going to get better control of things.
But I guess one of where I was going out, that thing that I just see mixed messages. Like, you can't pick up a magazine or a newspaper without reading about the opioid crisis. But then you watch the Arizona Cardinals game, and every third commercial is beer, beer, beer. I was watching what was that? I was watching tonight. It was a show. It was sponsored by Hennessy, and I think it was it was either a boxing match or a MMA fight. And it's like, well, those are the people in that ring are perfect physical specimens fighting in boxing. They don't drink Hennessy. I don't know any prize fighters that drink Hennessy. They drink bottled water and work out every day. So it just seems like it's so many mixed messages. Like they talk about all these opioids, but it seems like every other commercial is alcohol or liquor, and then they write these little laws like, well, they can't drink the liquor, but they can show the bottle. Isn't it? And again, they're talking about this opioid, and but alcoholism is bigger, and I think it's mixed message when you have alcohol commercials to all these kids who are watching. Like, if you're watching the Olympics or you're watching the Cardinals or the Diamondbacks, you think after the show you want to go out in the front yard and throw a football, not drink Hennessy and Budweiser. And so let's take that. Or is alcohol a gateway drug? I mean, do people that get into opioids, did they start with a beer and a shot of Hennessy?
That's a very good question, Howard. I think that unfortunately a lot of young people start experimenting at a very young age. At 11, 12, 13, they start having their first sip of alcohol, or they smoke marijuana. And I think that substance abuse, whether it's opioids or alcohol, once you are into an addiction, you can substitute one for the other. So somebody who may be a heroin addict may think, okay, I got off heroin, now I can just go ahead and drink once in a while because that's not my drug of choice. But that's not really the case. Addicted you may be addicted to alcohol for a while and then switch over to smoking marijuana every day, or you might switch over to using meth every day. So alcohol and marijuana are both gateways to other things, because part of the addiction process is that you build up a tolerance and you just keep wanting more and more and more.
So you just mentioned marijuana, another mixed signal. You know, all the news on the opioid crisis, yet all the commercials during sporting events are alcohol based. Ahwatukee just opened up a marijuana dispensary. What is it called, Ryan?
Sunflower Meds.
Sunflower Meds.
Mm-hmm.
And I always see your car parked out in front of it.
Never.
What is your expert opinion on that? Is this going to be? Is it a good thing, a neutral thing in your mind, a bad thing? What did you think when Ahwatukee got a medical marijuana dispensary?
Howard, I'm not an expert on it, but I believe that having a dispensary is not a good thing. I think that we need to be in all of our five senses, and I think that telling everyone that smoking marijuana is okay is it's not a good way to promote healthy brain function. And I think that people that are dying of cancer, smoking marijuana may ease their pain, and I'm all for that, but I don't think that every other person age 19 to 30 or older needs to go to a dispensary and use that as their medication.
And it also, if it's for sale, that kind of would make, I would think, a young kid think it's almost okay and endorsed.
Yes, I think that, yes, I hear that every day. I hear people say it is totally, marijuana is not even a drug. Well, marijuana is just as much a drug as alcohol is a drug, as opioids are drugs. And maybe it's not as strong as an opioid or as other things, but it still can impair your functioning. It can still cause you to get into a car accident.
Do you see? Yeah, and that's tough because a policeman can pull you over and breathalyze you, and tell you if you're drank too much, but they can't measure how much marijuana. And plus,
well, they can find it in your bloodstream, and
so
people can still get a DUI just by having marijuana in their system. And if they get in a car accident and they hit someone, or they can still have an aggravated DUI for having marijuana in their system, even if they have a marijuana card.
I heard a guy on TV one time, and he seemed like an expert. He seemed really knowledgeable on substance abuse. He'd been in this whole life. He said if 100 people drank a pint of whiskey every night for 100 days, maybe only 20% would be alcoholics. But if 100 people took Vicodin, Percodan, or OxyContin every day for 100 days, they'd probably all be addicted to it. Do you find that? Do you think opioids are more addictive than alcohol or marijuana?
Yes, I think that, well, first of all, marijuana, people normally can get psychologically addicted to it rather than physically addicted to it. But opioids, there's a physical addiction to it. Alcohol, there's a physical addiction to it.
With alcohol and opioids, there's a physical addiction.
Yes.
But what about
and with marijuana and methamphetamines, it's more of a psychological addiction. So it's a little bit easier to detox from marijuana and methamphetamines than it is to detox from something that's physically addicting.
So, put on your mom hat. What if some lady's watching you right now and she's like, she's really stressed out because her husband comes home every night and drinks a 12-pack and a pint of schnapps, and she doesn't know what to do. Or she's got a daughter that goes to Mountain Point and she knows she's on something because she comes home and she's erratic and crazy and screaming and yelling and what resources? What can she do? What would you advise her to get help?
I would definitely advise her to get some counseling for her daughter and definitely take her in and get her evaluated.
But where? Is there any place in Ahwatukee?
There are lots of good resources in Ahwatukee. There's definitely addiction counselors right here in Ahwatukee and places that you can go and get evaluated. And even the school counselors can be a good resource.
School counselors?
Yes, at Mountain Point or Desert Vista. So if a mom is having concerns, she might call the school and ask the counselor to have a consultation with her daughter and see if they can brainstorm some good resources to get her daughter involved with. And even
do you have a list of resources in Ahwatukee, or do you have any names or numbers?
I don't have any names or numbers offhand, but there are definitely resources.
When you say counselors, I think most people. I think if you said a counselor, most people think of like a marriage counselor, or are you talking about like your routine psychologist? You know, they say the number one search on Google is whatever you search for near me, like dentist near me, counselor. Would you type in, if you were an Ahwatukee, counselor near me, or
I would probably
drug therapist?
Yes,
drug therapist near me. So you'd recommend the first way would be counseling.
Yes.
And would you recommend they be a psychologist, or is there any certifications or licensing or any? I mean, are some better than others?
Yes, there's some better than others, but I would say just to go in and get an evaluation, starting at a regular counselor level, and then go from there. Figure out.
So tell them what you actually do.
What I do is I actually work in a facility where where we see court-ordered clients that have to come in for substance abuse classes, domestic violence, anger management.
Oh wow! So say it again. Court-ordered for
substance abuse, anger management, domestic violence.
Wow!
And I work in Mesa.
And you work in Mesa. So because you don't really see any of that in Ahwatukee. That's pretty much, I mean, when you think of substance abuse, anger management, and domestic violence, that is a Mesa problem.
No, that's also an Ahwatukee problem.
I'm just kidding. You know what's sad about domestic violence is when they started 911, for all 50 states, for every year they had it, domestic violence is the number one call to 911. Did you know that?
Believe it.
I mean, if you ask a stranger on the street, what would be the number one reason someone called 911? You'd say it was fell down with a heart attack. Maybe number two, they crashed their car. Man, it's domestic violence every state, every year since they started it. And that's another problem where if I broke my arm, everybody would sign my cast, but domestic violence is kind of a behind closed door taboo. I mean, people don't want to go to work and say, "Oh, I called 911 on my husband last night," or so. It's very taboo, isn't it?
Yes.
Like Sade's song, "The Sweetest Taboo."
And yes, and if a man is being beaten up by his wife or girlfriend, he doesn't want to call and say, "Hey, I'm being battered at home." That's a really even bigger taboo. Because
she's a girl and
yes,
men are bigger and have 27% more muscle mass, so you don't want to say my old lady's beating me up at night. So what advice would you give on domestic violence? We'll switch from substance abuse to domestic violence. What have you learned over the years about domestic violence? My first question is, I can't imagine the old man beating up the old lady unless first he was substance abuse drunk. I mean, do people really do that behavior stone cold sober?
Yes, they do.
Really?
And
that seems so. I always thought it was a drunk issue.
A lot of times it is a drunk issue, and let's define domestic violence. Domestic violence isn't just it isn't just about hitting someone else physically, beating them up. It's about verbally domestic violence could be throwing somebody's phone. It can be doing anything that causes another person to feel afraid, to feel in fear for their life.
Throwing stuff, breaking stuff.
Yes.
Flipping over the furniture.
You could be putting a hole through your own wall. That can be enough for you to have a domestic violence charge.
But so what percent of is it? I would think it's far more men than women, because I remember, I don't know this off the top of my head, but anytime I've seen a prison population stat, it seems like prisons are over 80% men. So do you have any stats on what percent of people in jail are boys versus girls, and is that about the same ratio as domestic violence?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure what the exact stats are today. But
Brian,
I think,
Google that. What percent of the U.S. prison population is male versus female?
I believe there's only really one prison for females, and there's several for males. So there's a lot more men in prison than women.
So I would just think from that, extrapolating that a lot more men beat up their wife than wives beat up men. Is that what you see, or not really?
I believe so. I believe that
It's 14 times more males than females.
1 divided by 15. So yeah, it's 6% girls and 94% boys. Is that about what you see in domestic violence in your classes, or is it 1 girl for every 14 boys, or not really?
I'd say that's about right.
Yeah. So what do you think it is about a boy? Does that also apply to substance abuse and alcoholism and drug addiction? Is it more of a boy issue? Or?
No, I don't think so. When it comes to substance abuse, I think it's probably more 50-50.
Okay. But why? So what do you think it is about me being a man and you being a woman that makes me 14 times more likely to go to jail and hit my wife than you?
Number one, when it comes down to calling the police and reporting, I think women are more apt to report when there's a problem than a male is.
Wow, that is so interesting. So I got out of dental school 30 years ago, and when we were in dental school, when you talked about TMJ, grinding your teeth, and migraines and that whole effect, it was all women. So the researchers back then were like, well, it must be something to do with estrogen or progesterone, or, they were all studying that. And then it took them decades to find out that there was no difference between boys and girls, just that when girls have a healthcare problem, they raise their hand, and you're saying they call 911, this is unacceptable. Yes. They go to the dentist, they say, I have a migraine, this and that. But when, and I also saw it when I was little with, when we drove from Wichita, Kansas to Disneyland, my dad would never ask instructions. He could be driving around lost for an hour, and my mom's like, will you just stop and ask for help? But in his walnut brain, it was just like he was too manly to call and ask for help, or if they have migraines, to call for help. I have a friend who's a physician. He goes, men will come in to the emergency room, and they've had like black diarrhea runs for a year. And they come in there, and sometimes they die. They have an ulcerated colon. But he says a woman would, after 3 or 4 days of that, she'd say, something's wrong. Yes. And she'd go to her doctor. But grandpa, so a lot of it's men don't raise their hand for help.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so is that pride and ego, or is that
It's a pride and ego, and I think that a lot of times when there is a problem, a man wants to take care of it. So even once the police show up, a man is going to be more likely to say, I can't let the mother of my children go to jail, so I'm just going to say I'm the more responsible one and take the hit, because they don't want their significant other to get in trouble. So they feel like they're doing the honorable thing.
Now you've been counseling domestic violence for how long?
Well, I work for Child Protective Services as a case manager, and I've been working in the job I'm in now for the past 8 years.
You also did Child Protective Service?
Yes.
And you've had a robust career. I mean, really, Child Protective Services, domestic violence, anger management, substance abuse. But back to domestic violence. Any pointers? What would you say to? Is domestic violence would all be couple related, right? I mean,
yes.
If you're a single bachelor, wouldn't be
Well,
a domestic violence issue. I mean,
There-
if you're living alone, you can't.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's pretty much all couples.
Mostly it's couples, or it can be with a family member.
Okay.
You can still, it's any
Yeah. Who is a
person-
one of the most famous musicians was killed by his own? Was it Marvin Gaye?
was killed by
His son, I think.
His son.
Ryan, will you Google that? Was Marvin? I think it was Marvin Gaye was killed by his own son. But the point I was leading to is it's probably mostly couples, not dad and son.
It's more couples than dad and
Who's his
son,
own
but it
father?
does happen.
Oh,
between dad
Marvin
and
Gaye
son.
was killed by his own father.
Yeah.
How? What's
It was
that?
in 1984.
1984. Yeah, that was a stunning shock to the music world. One of the biggest rock and roll legends ever, killed by his own dad. But the point I was trying to lead up to is, it's mostly couples instead of calling because mom's hitting the daughter or the dad the son. But do you think that that's kind of a red line? I mean, if you and I are married and it gets to the point where you call 911 and you've been in counseling this year, is that kind of a red line where you're kind of saying, look, you've crossed a line. You guys,
Yes.
half of marriages end in divorce. You two shouldn't be together. Is that usually the case? I mean, would you say in your decade experience that that's a line that you've crossed and that kind of means you guys shouldn't be together, or are those repairable?
Sometimes it's repairable, but sometimes it needs a lot of help. In a lot of the cases that I see, a lot of times it's not one of the couple that's calling the police. It's somebody that's hearing the two people arguing that calls the police. So a lot of times the couples stay together, and it's kind of a warning signal that they need to get some marriage counseling or they need to get some couples counseling because the way that they're communicating is not healthy.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of times it's about choices. A lot of times we make decisions on our partners based on maybe some of the dysfunctions that we had growing up, and sometimes people end up with a partner that is similar to a relationship that they had with a parent that maybe wasn't the best relationship. And so if one parent is really controlling, then they may pick a partner that's controlling, and they may pick that same type of partner over and over again. So instead of just having one charge of domestic violence or anger management classes, they may keep reliving the cycle until they get enough help to realize that they need to break that cycle and make better choices.
So that old adage is true. They say that if your dad used to beat up your mom and she has two daughters, they'll find some boy that will beat them up too. Is that what?
Not always, but sometimes.
Are
Sometimes
they
that
more likely?
happens.
Are they more likely to pick a relationship like their mom and dad?
Sometimes.
But not.
Not always, but sometimes.
It's interesting how, again, 30 years ago when I was in school, how you had all, when you study pathology, you have all these different diseases. Now they're kind of clumping them. They're finding out a lot of them are related, comorbidity. Like families have this autoimmune cluster where you'll do an entire family tree, and if someone has celiac sprue, they can't eat gluten. Those families also have thyroid disorders, also have diabetes, also have MS. So if you find like a big family and, 3 people have diabetes and 2 are on thyroid medication and one can't eat gluten for celiac sprue, the epidemiologist will say, you keep watching this family, someone's going to get MS. They're all kind of related. And it seems like you're hearing more these days that substance abuse and a lot of these things have a comorbidity with other things. Like sometimes they say, well, if you had 100 alcoholics, 80% of them might have this or that. Or what is the comorbidity with these with substance abuse? I mean, like mental illness. Some people say that
A lot of people are duly diagnosed.
Or what?
Duly diagnosed.
What is
Yeah.
duly diagnosed?
Duly diagnosed meaning
Oh, dual.
yes, meaning that they have a mental illness and substance abuse, and
Like my
times.
one of my favorite dentists in the world, Chris Volchak, runs a homeless shelter. He was born and raised in Globe. He runs the, it was called Cast for years. Now it's the Bright Way.
Okay, yes.
But I've known him for 30 years, and he says that, when you look at the homeless people, he says over 85% are schizophrenic. And when you see that guy standing by the road with a sign, I mean, he's done this for 30 years. He's like 85% are schizophrenic. And so, it's one thing if you lost your job and you just had a lot of bad luck. You wrecked your car, you lost your job, your family's in another country. He says they get about 10 or 15% of the homeless. They get them some resources, get them some food, and help them back up their feet, and they integrate back in society. But he said that the 85% schizophrenic, if they leave the home, he might be talking a year later to his buddy at another homeless shelter in L.A. or San Fran, and he's there. And then sometimes they come back 5 years later, So what percent? So if you had 100 people with a substance abuse issue, alcohol, heroin, whatever, what percent of them do you think have some other mental health
Co-occurring.
What percent would you say?
Just guessing, I would say 30%.
A third. Mm-hmm. And would it be any particular type? Would it be depression? Would it be?
I think a lot of people that have bipolar, depression, things like that, self-medicate with drugs and alcohol.
So bipolar would be the most likely?
I think so.
Yeah.
It seems like that's what I see a lot of.
Yeah. And do you see bipolars being treated successfully with medication, or is it still early on, I mean, go back to when we were little. If you had any mental disorder, one of the first drugs was lithium. Mm-hmm. But it didn't take long for everybody to realize that was by no means any cure-all for...
Yes. I think absolutely. I had a gentleman in my class last night who said that he's bipolar and he has severe substance abuse issues. And when he is taking his medication, he says he does very well, that it's much easier for him to stay sober and stay on the right track. But when he's not on his medications, when he falls off the wagon, he gets heavily into drugs again.
I wonder where that term came from, falls off the wagon. Ryan, Google that. Where did the term falls off the wagon? I like word origination. Anger management. You got to admit, that was a great movie.
It was a great movie.
Who was the star of that? Who was in anger management?
Adam Sandler.
And
Jack Nicholson.
And Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, that was hilarious. That
was a great movie. So is anger management, is that kind of a comorbidity with domestic violence? Do domestic violence people, is that anger management? Is that kind of all the same thing?
It's similar. I mean, it's basically about people taking things too far. People not being able to cope with situations and losing it. And losing it by getting into an argument, getting into a fist fight, getting into breaking something, destroying property. Again, anything that causes other people to worry about their safety, to feel scared.
Yeah. One of the most interesting things I ever read was I think it was the head psychiatrist of Johns Hopkins wrote an op-ed piece, I think it was in the New York Times or something, where he was saying that when people have mental illness and are on mental medications, there's a lot of research that the people who take their daily medication and exercise 40 minutes a day did significantly better than the people who just took their medication. And the controversial part was that people who didn't take their medication but exercised, I think it was like an hour a day, actually did pretty damn good. And what he was trying to say with this deal is that the evidence is overwhelming that, I see people with depression, and I see so much this. They wake up in the morning, their only breakfast is a Starbucks. Then at lunch, they go have Taco Bell. Then after work, they go to the bar and drink alcohol and hors d'oeuvres. And then before they go to bed, they take a little blue pill. And it's like, can that little blue pill, no exercise, no diet, no nutrition. I mean, you can't, because the brain is as physical as your arm. I mean, people think that they're a spirit and that, they're a human spirit. They don't realize that a human spirit is an organ. It's a 3.5 pound brain. If it doesn't get enough sleep, you don't feed it right, throw coffee and caffeine and nicotine on it all day long, and then throw a bunch of depressants on it after work, like alcohol, that negating all that with taking an antidepressant before you go to bed, that's not what anybody's recommending. And he was saying that the people who get their 8 hours of sleep, get good nutrition, exercise an hour a day, and then take their pill, they do so much better than the people who abuse themselves all day long and just think, well, I can abuse myself all day long because I went to a doctor and I take a pill every day.
I absolutely agree with you. Having the balance between mind, body, and spirit is absolutely so important. Being nutritionally fit, being physically fit, and some people do need the medication to help chemically balance them, but the combination of all three is absolutely amazing how much of a change you can make by just changing your diet, changing your habits, and changing your lifestyle, and doing yoga and going out for a nice brisk walk in the morning. And
you are a fitness guru. She full disclosure, she's been my personal trainer for what, 3 years?
Yes.
You are an amazing personal trainer, you got me through 3 Ironmans. Wendy actually got an award for getting the fattest, oldest guy to finish an Ironman. In fact, when I got my Ironman medal, they actually gave it to her and made it larger. But you just eat perfect. Like you're getting ready to do St. George Marathon, and it'll be your 11th time.
Yes.
I mean, most people will never run a marathon. You've ran just one marathon. 11. How many marathons have you run?
I've probably run over 50 marathons.
Holy, I wouldn't even want to drive 50 marathons. And how many Ironmans have you done?
5.
50 marathons, 5 Ironmans. I mean, so where does that come from? Was your mom and dad marathon fitness runners? Did you come from a long line of family athletes, or what?
No, I didn't. Both my parents struggled with their weight, and basically when I was in high school, my dad started running at the YMCA.
Your dad did?
My dad did when I was about 14 years old, and it inspired me. So I joined the track team and started running, and I loved it, and I never really stopped. And it really inspired me, just seeing him go out and run. And
you don't know how many times you've been driving around Ahwatukee and she's running beside the road. I mean, I've seen you running a gazillion million times, and sometimes you're way down on different corners across I-10. I mean, you're like, how long is your run going to be tomorrow?
20 miles.
Holy moly! And most people in Ahwatukee, they wouldn't drive 20 miles to the Scottsdale Fashion Center, even if they really needed an outfit for Friday night. They'd say it's too far. So, man, that is just amazing.
Thank you.
And what you said is so interesting, because I got one friend who's very close friend. He's never had a drink in his life. He's never even tasted it, because his old man used to get really drunk and beat up his mom and him and his sister and all this stuff. And he what does he call it? Firewater or what? Crazy juice or something like that.
Okay.
Never touch it. I got another friend,
Fireball,
who's a complete alcoholic and blames it on his dad because his dad was an alcoholic. So it's kind of like the glass is half full or half empty. I mean, some people, their childhood, they say, okay, my mom and dad had a problem with weight, so I'm not going to have a problem with weight. Other people, their parents had a problem with weight, so that's their excuse to have a problem with weight their whole life. Agree or disagree?
I agree. But the cool thing is, I was in Michigan a couple weeks ago, and I got my dad at age 77 to walk a 5K with me. And so I'm from the belief system that at any age, at any level, people can change. My dad just lost 73 pounds over the last
At age 70 what?
At age 77 with diabetes.
He's 77 with diabetes? Now,
Yes.
Is that insulin dependent?
Yes. Well, yes.
So he shoots insulin.
Mm-hmm.
He injects insulin. And was still at 77 able to lose how much weight?
He was able to lose 73 pounds
That is
on
amazing.
Weight Watchers.
And you know, back to those marathons, one of my favorite dentists in the world is Rich Maddow, and no, his brother Dave Maddow. They're both dentists. There's
I
actually
know Dave Maddow.
Yeah,
I met him on the plane.
That is
going back from the Boston Marathon.
And it was Dave Maddow.
Yes.
Yeah, and he has done as many marathons as you, but he walks them all. And he says,
awesome.
you know, everybody thinks that a marathon is, you know, Wendy's going to do a 5-hour marathon. I mean, you're,
3 hours and 45 minutes, hopefully.
3 hours and 45 minutes. Anything under 5 is considered really, really good, right? And he says Dave Maddow says, that day he would never have walked 26 miles, but when you go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there's music, it's fun, and he says the back of the marathon is always 100 walkers just having a great day, and he says it takes about 6 hours, and he says to just get up on Saturday and think, well, I'm going to go on a, 26.2?
Yes.
I'm going to go on a 26.2 mile walk. I mean, that's damn good exercise.
Absolutely.
As opposed to what? Sitting on the couch and watching 3 football games back to back, or watching NASCAR all day to go on a 26.2 mile walk. And he's a big champion for, if you're not a Wendy Gesund, then be a walker. And he thinks they're a blast.
They are a blast, and that's the beauty of it. As long as you can walk, as long as you can move, you can do an event, you can do a race, and it's so much fun. It's such a hoot, and it does motivate you. My cousin also did the 5K with me. He had childhood diabetes, he has Hodgkin's disease, and he's 45, and he did his first 5K while I was in Michigan, and that was 3 weeks ago, and now he's been to an event every weekend since, and he's raising money for diabetes. And it is the coolest thing to watch him do that. It is so inspiring, because out of anyone, I never thought that he would want to do something like that, and it's hard for him to run, but he's doing it and he's loving it. So I don't think it's ever too late, or you're ever too disabled or sick or unhealthy to do things. There's always time to turn things around.
And one thing I've noticed about, well, number one, I mean, you're a personal trainer, you're a counselor, you're so many things, but I also noticed that it's a lifestyle and it's a social network. I mean, I've noticed that people have moved to Ahwatukee and were kind of lonely and didn't know anybody, and then joined your running club at Lifetime, and it's a big social network. I noticed there's so many girls where you guys are all connected by this running, biking, swimming. It's a huge social
It
scene.
is. That's my social life.
I tease Wendy, and I tease her, but it's absolutely true. I don't know anybody on earth who knows more people than Wendy. I mean, it's true. I mean, you go on a walk around your Lifetime, it seems like every third person in Ahwatukee, Wendy! How many people do you know in Ahwatukee?
I don't know, but it is. It's
There's
a great
80,000
way.
people in Ahwatukee. Wendy knows about 2,412,000. I mean, really. I mean, you go see mountain bikers, street bikers, runners, joggers, walkers. So are you still doing your Lifetime?
I am. I still lead a Lifetime Run Club every Wednesday morning, and we run through Ahwatukee, and it's just a blast. And there are so many different groups.
Are you open for more people?
Absolutely.
How would they
just
join?
show up on Wednesday morning at 5 a.m. in
At
front
Lifetime.
of Lifetime. Yes, and we run to Ahwatukee.
And what I noticed most about Wendy is when I started personal training with her, I got this, number one, I got a goal. I was going to do an Ironman, and you said you'd help me, and you got me through 3 of them.
Yes.
But what I notice is, because I know the first thing you're thinking is 5 a.m. I can't get up at 5 a.m. I mean, I got to sleep. I'll be right at work. But, it's 5 a.m. somewhere on the planet going around. But what I noticed is that when I started setting my alarm and getting up with you, what happened was at nighttime I wouldn't stay up watching Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon, and you wouldn't be surfing TV channels 11 or 12, and so you fall asleep. So there's really no such thing as if you start setting your alarm at 5 o'clock, you commit to that, you just start falling asleep at 8:30 or 9 o'clock.
Right.
And then if you say, well, I can't get up at 5 o'clock. Well, you're not going to go to bed at 8 or 8:30 or 9, and you start creeping up to staying up till 9 or 10 or 11. And another thing, I hate to sound holistically crazy, but in your group of all these athletes, so many of them did it for so many different reasons. Some of your friends, I've heard them talk over the years, they did to lose weight. Some did it because they cured insomnia.
Yes.
I mean, it seems like so many people at different levels of athletic ability. I mean, I'm probably the fattest guy that you've ever ran or walked with. But some people, it seems like so many people got so many things out of it. Some did it for substance abuse. Some did it for insomnia. Some did it for weight loss. But they all seem to do it for improved mental health and happiness. And
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the connections that you build in the community when you're getting out and you're running or riding your bike and doing things, it just improves your overall lifestyle. I mean, you're always better doing things in a group with more people because it inspires you. It's more fun. You know that there's accountability if you're going to be meeting people, that they're counting on you to be there. So even when you don't feel like getting up, you get up anyway, and you just go and you have so much fun, and then you remember that the next time that you don't want to get up. So
now you lead the Lifetime run at Lifetime, which is what is it? It's Tempe. It's by IKEA.
Yes,
what's
Tempe Lifetime. It's near Warner and
it's between Warner and Elliott on what?
On Ruby
Priest?
Drive. It's near Priest, yeah.
So, but
Priest and Warner.
Priest and Warner. Do you take on personal clients anymore, or
you're my number one client?
But if someone's watching and someone else wants,
if somebody wanted me to be their inspirational coach, I would take them on. But yes, I would.
You would, because what is so cool about you is doing the Ironman was so fun, is because you're not doing the same thing every day. Some days we would bike, some days we'd walk, jog, run. Swimming, that was all new to me. If you would have asked me,
you got so good at it
before I met you, and you swim, it's like, well, yeah, everybody goes to the pool and swims and goes off the diving board. Looking back, I had no appreciation for how sophisticated swimming was. I mean, I would say walking, anybody can walk. Getting on a bicycle, that was a little more difficult, especially with leaning forward on those little, trying to go, riding a bicycle 10 miles an hour is pretty easy, but trying to get to 20 miles an hour is a lot of learning. But I had no idea that swimming was more, it was like gymnastics or something. It's like,
right.
It's like having a black belt in karate. It was
yes.
so technical. And that was amazing. But you mix it up so many things with hikes, Squaw Peak, hikes on South Mountain. I've done so many fun things with you. I think 3 Christmases in a row we went up to Squaw Peak, and there's a
Camelback.
It was Camelback,
and there was a
Santa Claus
on top of Camelback.
And we ran into another dentist. You ran into a lot of Joyce Bassett.
Yes.
Dennis in Scottsdale. You ran into my other dentist friend, Dave Maddow, on an airplane.
Yes.
And that was funny. But I just think you're really, you are one of the pillars of Ahwatukee in so many ways.
Thank you, Howard.
I mean, really. And
really
my gosh,
sweet.
if you go to Lifetime with Wendy, it's like walking in there with Elvis. The people wanting her autograph, everybody's waving at her, everybody knows her name, yeah, you're just an amazing person, an amazing role model. You've done so much for me and my family in so many ways, and so much. I just think you're just one hell of a person. And thanks for coming on the show. I'm sure people in Ahwatukee I think a lot of people in Ahwatukee learned a lot of things today about substance abuse, anger management, domestic violence, physical fitness. And thank you, seriously, for coming over and sharing an hour of your time.
Thank you, Howard. Thanks for having me.